Hey guys! Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hello, I hope you stick around. Today I'm super excited because I am finally filming my review for The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is the prequel novel in the Hunger Games trilogy. I will not be talking about any spoilers in the first part of this review, so if you've not read the book yet, don't worry, I will let you know before I start talking about spoilers. So without any further ado, I will get right into it. I wanted to start with the world building aspect because I absolutely loved the world building in this book, just because I love the original Hunger Games novels so much and I love the dystopian world that it's set in, that any background info, I just eat it right up. So like, that's just me. I don't know if other people were as excited about that, but I just really loved all of the background info, all of the references, of which there were many. Like, I loved all of that. But going a little bit deeper, I especially loved seeing how you get from point A to point B, in the sense that we are looking at a capital that is very different from the capital in the original Hunger Games novels, and it was really interesting to see how that capital becomes the other capital. It's super interesting to see how they become those frivolous, naive, super materialistic people when in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, they are really just a nation, or like a city of people, I guess, trying to recover from a really long war, and they're 10 years out from this war and they're still struggling. Some of them are still struggling to get by, and Snow is one of those people whose family has lost a lot of their money and now they are scraping by. There are also several references and Easter eggs hidden throughout this novel, and again, if you have not read the originals, you're not really gonna miss anything in the sense of storyline, but it is super fun to make those connections between the books and the universes and kind of see how you get from point A to point B again. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it because I just love the original so much that seeing any reference was, I love it. Moving on to the characters, starting with Snow, I guess, because the book is told from his perspective. I know a lot of people were concerned that reading this book would make them kind of more empathetic towards Snow, and they didn't want that because Snow is obviously the villain in the original Hunger Games, and in this one it is told from his perspective, and so you're bound to get some kind of sympathetic look at him. But I would say it's not as big of a concern as some people were making it out to be. You're not gonna leave this book with just like a newfound love for Snow, because honestly, he's not a super lovable character. Like, obviously he ends up as a villain, and so this is more of just him kind of explaining his motivations and you learning as a reader how he gets to be the person he is in the later novels. And in this, it's not that you're going to suddenly love Snow and totally understand every decision he's made and support the decisions he's made. That's not what happens. You see his motivations, you see his progression, you see the relationships, the reasons, his like experiences that make him who he is. Whether you agree with them or not is besides the point, but honestly, I personally did not leave this book thinking, wow, Snow is such a misunderstood character. He's not. This is just like more insight into his character, which I still really enjoyed, but I don't think that concern is too much to worry about. Now, Tigress, on the other hand, I'm not going to go into too much on who she is without revealing anything, but basically I wish we had seen more of Tigress in this book. I went into this totally blind. I had no idea who she was other than her brief appearance in Mockingjay, in which she helps out Katniss and the team, and she is said to have been a stylist, and she no longer, like, she hates oh my gosh, I almost said she hates Trump. She hates Snow, and that's all we really know about her, but in this book she plays a much deeper role, and I think that if Suzanne Collins was to write another book about Snow, I think I would really like to see the fallout between Tigress and Snow, because their relationship in this book is just so interesting, and I was super invested in that. Sejanus, I don't know how to say his name. I'm just gonna say Sejanus because that's how I said it in my head. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but Sejanus is a friend of Snow's, and I say friend with quotes because it's very obvious very early on that Sejanus cares for Snow a lot more than Snow cares for Sejanus, and this comes into play later on. Sejanus kind of plays the moral compass throughout the book, and I think that was really important and really interesting given Suzanne Collins kind of weaving in all of the ideologies, which I'm not going to talk about too much in this section, but I will talk about later on. And he kind of plays that moral compass, and I think that was really interesting. There are certain points of the book where he does seem kind of annoying, and I had to keep reminding myself that it's not that he's just an annoying character, it's that we're looking at it through Snow's perspective. And so so that helped me out a little bit. And Lucy Gray, saving the best for last. She was super interesting. She had so much spunk. She is definitely not another Katniss. Just because she is from District 12 does not make her another Katniss, and I was like super caught off guard. I did not expect a character like Lucy Gray, and there she was. And I feel like a lot of characters in the novel feel like that when she just shows up, and I don't even know what to say about Lucy Gray, except she's a thoroughly enjoyable character. I loved her character so much. Like, she was super unique. Her backstory is super unique, and just everything about her and the role she plays is super good. So moving on to the games. The games are obviously the 10th Hunger Games, and that makes them a lot more rudimentary than the original games that we saw in the previous novels. In the like 75th Hunger Games or even the 74th Hunger Games, there's a lot of game maker intervention, there's a lot of advanced technology, there's recordings, there's hovercrafts, and all sorts of stuff going on. And in this Hunger Games, you don't really get that. Like, yes, the Hunger Games are a part of this book, but to a much lesser extent, in the sense that we're not seeing the games from the tribute's perspective, we're seeing it from Snow's perspective as a mentor looking down, and a lot of the games are not even seen just because of the nature of the technology that's not really that advanced. You know, they don't have cameras that follow them everywhere they go. A lot of the districts are hiding a lot of the time. A lot of the tributes are hiding a lot of the time, and there's just not a lot of like physical stuff going on except at key points during the games. And so honestly, personally, I found the games portion a little boring just because I was expecting something more like the original games, and it wasn't. You don't really get that, and I see that now, like, it's understandable, but at times it was just a little bit boring for me. But I think it was an interesting take on it, and it was, again, interesting to see how the games progressed from the 10th Hunger Games to the later on Hunger Games, because 60 years is a long time for a lot of stuff to change, and you see just how much is actually changing during that time. Writing-wise, I did really enjoy the book, but as a lot of people have said, the pacing was kind of off at some times. Again, some parts were just really boring. It was very detailed, and while I did really like the detail in certain portions when it was about world building or references to the old novels, there were some points that were just really dragged out in my opinion, and I feel like it could have done without a lot of that detail. But overall, I gave the book a 4 out of 5 despite the pacing, because I just really enjoyed this world and I was having to get another book, and it was really well written, and each chapter ended on a cliffhanger, which was a great way of keeping you hooked. I had a hard time putting this book down, except in the middles of certain chapters. As I've said, the pacing was kind of slow. So that concludes the non-spoiler section of this review. So if you have not read this book, please don't watch the rest of this video unless you don't plan on watching the book, because I will be getting into spoilers and name dropping and all sorts of stuff. So if you have not read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, you can click off now. I'll give you like 5 seconds to leave. Now, getting into the spoilers, I really did not expect the dark turns in this novel. Even though, knowing the Hunger Games, I should have expected all of the dark turns, I just didn't. I don't know what I went into this expecting, but like, this was not it. Like, the games in the original Hunger Games were more of a spectacle and sport, and while there was death, and it was like graphic death, it was still, you could see that it was kind of a televised event, and they did take pains to kind of block out certain things, I guess, and while they didn't block out the deaths, it's like, they cleaned up after the bodies, you know, like they picked up the bodies, and they don't do any of that. This is really just a barbaric punishment for the districts, and even the people in the capital don't really like watching it at first, because there's no spectacle portion of the games that they want to watch. It's really just a bunch of tributes tossed into this dilapidated arena with weapons, and they just kill each other or starve to death, and half of it you can't even see because they're just inside and in the little tunnels, and even the drones are rudimentary. Like, it's just barbaric. Like, they hang up the tributes who tried to escape, and just that whole thing was just really kind of more at the root of the nature of the Hunger Games, which is that mankind is like barbaric, and if you just leave them to their own defenses, they will just kill each other. And the fact that the tributes were dehumanized at every point leading up to this kind of adds to that. Like, the fact that they were transported in like cattle trains or whatever, and then they were tossed into a monkey exhibit at a like deserted zoo. Just that whole thing is just at every point. And there's a point where Lepidus, the news reporter, is talking to one of the mentors whose tribute has just died, and she says that her tribute protected her whenever the bombs went off in the arena, and Lepidus goes, "Oh, like a dog?" And she says, "No, like a human." And just the fact that the people in the capital already have started seeing the districts as less than human, as less than, is just really interesting to see and also like really dehumanizing. And even in our world, like we have instances of other races or other groups of people being marginalized or being dehumanized, put into zoos, like human zoos, and that kind of reminded me of that even in this fictional world you have a group of people that is being dehumanized for something out of their control. I did like seeing more insight into the old world, like before Panem, which is obviously the United States, but whenever Snow is traveling to District 12, he sees all the old cities, and then he sees the buildings by the lake, which Katniss did touch on in her story, but not as much because there was only one building left. But in this one, there's still some other buildings left, which was really interesting. And also that the arena is held in a old sporting arena, which in the later Hunger Games, it's held in a specially fabricated arena. But in this one, they are still using the remnants of an older time instead of just hiding it and kind of presenting their image of what they want people to see. They are still having the arena in a remnant of the older time before Panem. I already kind of touched on most of my opinions about the games, but again, it was really interesting to see that Snow was actually the reason behind a lot of the stuff that goes on in the later games. Like, he came up with the idea of betting, he came up with the idea of sending in food, and then later he comes up with a bunch of ideas as well to get the people in the Capitol more invested, and like the interviews were still like very rudimentary right now. The technology was very new, the drones malfunctioned a lot, the tribute was able to screw with the drones and have it attack another tribute, and all of that was just showing that the Capitol was not yet invincible at this point, or they didn't have that appearance of invincibility yet, that they could control every little thing. Also, Lucky Flickerman obviously is a ancestor of Caesar Flickerman, but he's so different. Like, Lucky is kind of ridiculous and he has no charisma on screen, whereas Caesar is actually kind of a good guy and everybody really likes talking to him, even if it is on screen. Like, he puts them at ease, and that is decidedly not the case in this. Like, Lucky Flickerman is just a ridiculous weatherman who's been given a mic and a parrot at one point. Like, he is ridiculous. Maybe his name should have been Hilarious instead of Hilarious Heavensby. Also, Reaper putting all of the dead tributes in a kind of mass grave covered in the flag was like, it made me feel things, because at that point the Capitol still wasn't making the effort to remove the bodies from the screen, and I think that was only put into play to make it more palatable for the actual Capitol spectators, I guess, not even for the tributes. But it was interesting because they ended up wiping this whole games from the record, and I think that was mainly because of what Snow did, but also I think that might have, it showed that the Capitol was not invincible, that this tribute still was acting, and he wasn't like a piece in their games, basically. Like, even though he had to kill them, he was still going to be respectful with their bodies and put them all in the spot and cover them with the flag out of respect, and I think that says a lot. Now, moving on to characters, Snow was, as many people have said, pretty morally gray for the entire thing, except like at the very end when he starts kind of acting more in a certain way, I guess. He was pretty likable at the very beginning, but that quickly deteriorated for me, and I was just like, come on, Snow, like, why are you acting like this? He was making me really mad. His actions in part 3, as I said, kind of bothered me a lot more than in 1 and 2, because in 1 and 2 is a lot more understandable. Like, the things he was doing, it was actually kind of entertaining. I'm like, yeah, go Snow. He's being really, like, politically savvy and kind of very charismatic, and he knows exactly what he needs to say and what he needs to do to retain his position, and, like, seeing him succeed at his goals was actually kind of exhilarating. But then in part 3, I'm like, his goals are just so against what I would have done in that situation that it was kind of harder to read, because you see that he starts going to really any lengths to get the outcome he desires, and in the first 2 parts those lengths are not exactly harmful to anybody. It's like, okay, he's putting on this semblance of being rich amongst these rich people, and yes, Tigress is having to go to great lengths to provide that and help him with that, but in the end I'm like, wow, she really made that shirt and people really believed that it was a brand new like shirt, and that he's still rich, and he really just does all sorts of things. My camera really just stopped recording while I was ranting about Snow, so I'm gonna take that as a sign to move on. I'm gonna move on to Tigress, and basically, I just wish we had gotten more of Tigress, because I really want to know what happened between her and Snow. I went into this completely blind. I had no idea she was Snow's cousin, and when I found that out, I was like mind blown, because that's insane. Like, you go from her really loving Snow and treating him like a little brother to not caring if he's dead. Like, I want to know what happened to bring that about, because that is the story I want to know. Like, she was really willing to go to any lengths to protect him and put food on the table, and the first thing I remember bothering me about Snow was the fact that he, first with Tigress and later with Lucy Gray, kind of puts the insinuated prostitution under, like, under them, I guess. Like, they're too good for that, sort of, and it kind of disgusts him, and he doesn't want to think about it. It makes him uncomfortable that they could do that, and he just kind of avoids that topic. And I'm like, okay, well, you've murdered, so I think you're not in any position to judge your cousin and Lucy for doing whatever they have to do to survive. Like, you don't even know, there's no proof that they have, but obviously just even the insinuation is enough to make him uncomfortable, and that bothered me a little bit. Okay, so moving on to Lucy Gray. I don't know if it's been confirmed anywhere, but I'm fairly sure she's related to Katniss, because just the whole music thing with the Coveys, and then her dad, Katniss's dad, obviously loving music, and then the songs being passed down to Katniss, and that was just so cool. Like, whenever you find out that Lucy Gray wrote The Hanging Tree, oh my gosh, I was so mind blown, because that whole thing just has so much history behind it, and it's so creepy to hear the first time in the Hunger Games, obviously, but then you find out why she wrote it and what she wrote it about and the story behind that, and that Snow was there to hear it and see the event that inspired the song is just so strange to think about. Like, oh my gosh. And also, it's really weird to see Snow kind of running around in all the places that Katniss grew up in, and that he has his own history in these places. Like, that's so wild. He went to that lake, like, he went to the Hob, he went to the Seam, it's crazy, and then he kissed a girl from the Seam. Like, oh my god, he kissed one of Katniss's ancestors? That's so weird. Like, to just, oh my gosh. I really want to know what happened to Lucy in the end and what she was thinking when she did that whole thing. Like, did she intentionally bait him into the woods and set a trap for him, like, the entire time? Did she know, like, the night before when she sang to him to meet him at the Hanging Tree, did she know what was going on? Did she know he killed Sejanus? I just have so many questions. I really want to know what happened and what was going through her head whenever, like, did she guess that Snow, when seeing the weapons, would realize that she was the only one standing between him and his life that he wanted originally? Like, did she think that he would just shoot her there? I don't know. And the fact that he went from loving her to immediately shooting her, like, I have so many thoughts about that scene. And Sejanus really got done dirty by Snow, because that boy did nothing but good for him. He got him cookies, for goodness sake, and Snow is over here giving him up for even the smallest chance that maybe Dr. Gall will reward him for giving him up. And I just find that so crazy. Like, that really tells you what kind of person Snow is. The fact that he had Sejanus killed, albeit unknowingly, but still had him killed, and then instead of being racked with guilt about it, he goes and eats Sejanus' cookie and then takes his family. Okay. And Dr. Gall was basically evil incarnate. It was kind of scary, like, the fact that she was the starter of all those mutt experiments is kind of insane, and that she would go to any lengths to teach Snow a lesson. Writing, again, the pacing was a bit slow sometimes. There were scenes where I was like, okay, get a move on. Some people have said that they didn't like part 3 as much. I honestly didn't like part 2 as much, just because that's where it got really slow for me. And there was a scene actually in part 3, which I did like more because of the references, but there was a scene specifically in part 3 where Snow is talking about his routine as a peacemaker, whatever. And he's literally describing his weekly routine, and it sounded like a really boring vlog. I almost annotated it and wrote, like, this is a really boring vlog, because he's like, on Monday I swept the floors, on Tuesday I had hash in the mess hall, on Wednesday I washed the dishes, blah 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 blah, and Saturday I finally get to go to the Hob and listen to Lucy Gray sing. I'm like, get a move on. Like, I get that you're doing really mundane things. That was the first time you told us you washed the dishes and swept the floors and ate the cookies, and now you're telling us again. Like, please hurry it up. On the other hand, I think some parts were done really well, and the chapters literally all ended in cliffhangers, I think, so, like, that was really cool. It really kept me hooked and kept it going, but I feel like I almost stopped reading in the middle of chapters. Like, usually I want to stop reading at the end of chapters, but then this one, the middle of the chapters, like, really lost me, and I was like, please just get to the point. And now, moving on to ideology. I'm not going to go too much into detail on this because I don't feel like I'm knowledgeable enough to really get to the point and get my points across, but I did want to touch on it a little bit. I did think that this element of the story was really fascinating, and reading about it afterwards in the little Q&A that I had in my version of the book, I think it was really cool to think about how it all weaves in. Like, the question of human nature and whether humans are inherently good or bad was a big part of this, where Dr. Gall obviously thinks that humans need control, and if they're left to their own devices, then they will end up killing each other because humans are evil or barbaric at heart or whatever, and she passes this on to Snow, who really believes in her ideology, and that if the humans are left to their own defenses, they will just kill each other, because the lesson that she had him learn was that you have this inside of you too, and whenever he goes into the arena and kills somebody, or whenever he is plunged into darkness in the hob and that kind of animal instincts comes back out, he feels that, he's like, okay, well, humans are, I guess, just inherently bad, and so we need control, we need the capital. Whereas Sejanus, on the other hand, thinks that humans are inherently good, and that even when all bets are off, we will try to do what is good for the others. And even there's elements of that in the games as well, like when Reaper kills them because he has to, but then he still manages to put all the bodies in a grave and kind of respect them in that way. But with Snow, even though he totally believes Gaul, like, his treatment of Lucy is not a deviation from that belief that the people of the districts are kind of animal and below them. It's because he just keeps trying to convince himself and everybody else that Lucy is not the animal district person. She is more capital than she is district, and he just uses that one point to kind of convince himself that loving her is not wrong and loving her is not against his own ideology. But yeah, it's definitely a lot to think about. I love a good book that, like, makes me think and is just the right amount of dark and twisty, and I think this book did it. Despite the pacing at some points, I still give it a 4 out of 5 because I did really enjoy reading it, and also because it is a prequel to a series I love a lot. I would have probably rated it highly just because of all of the references and all of the backstory that Suzanne Collins wove in, and I just really loved getting a lot of that little backstory. And I think that if she was to write more books, even if they were from Snow's perspective, just that period between Snow being 18 and Katniss being 16, like, I think that whole span of time is a really interesting period of time that has a lot of potential to it, and if she wrote them, I would probably read them because it's honestly really interesting. And also, I want the Tigress and Snow backstory. I want that. I need it. But also, I just really love reading backstories of dystopians because we don't get those too much, and I love seeing the process of how you get from something that is similar to our own world to something that is so wrong. Whenever you read it in the first place, it's like, oh, how could they have had something so barbaric as the Hunger Games? Like, how do you get so far gone, you know? And then you read about how once it was something that was not so different from our own world, and the process of it getting so far gone is something that you can really see our world getting to at some point. Not that I'm saying we will have a Hunger Games obviously in the future, but it's just really interesting to see that it's really easy to get from something where we are to something that seems so awful, and it's really just like a blink of an eye, and like something like that happens, and then you're like, oh, we're living in a world like this. And I think that's just a lot to think about, and it's really interesting. Just some food for thought. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. That was my review of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. If you did enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up, and let me know all your thoughts down below, because there's a lot of stuff that I want to know about what you guys thought about this book. And as always, don't forget to subscribe because I will be making new content very soon, and I will see you guys later.